Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode. And today I have with me Anna van de Heetkamp. Hopefully that's close to correct. And we are going to have a fascinating exploration of some global issues. So, Anna, first of all, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Tom, likewise. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Could you tell us your professional background?
I started many moons ago on a different continent with a different company in a different role. But in the meantime, through that, I got to the US in 2000 and worked in global trade throughout the career. It's spanning over 30 years now. I have done the consultancy part of it. I then moved into the software side of it. And through a number of companies now with Descartes for the last 4.5 years in Descartes, a Canadian-based company, and we are in the middle of the global trade arena. And I have been there for a longer period of time, as I said.
Anna, what's your role at Descartes?
So within Descartes, we have a number of product pillars or product groups, however you want to refer to them, including transportation management, warehouse management, route planning, and also a global trade intelligence pillar. The intelligence is to make us sound smarter, not necessarily because we are. And within the global trade intelligence pillar, I am responsible for product management. So the official
So,
title is Vice President of Product Management. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, could you take a step back and maybe give us a description of Descartes, the software products it provides, and then we'll go back to your role.
Yes. So Descartes is a supply chain management company. We have been around since the early 90s, and over the last 10, 15 years have been very active in the acquisition market. We support a wide variety of supply chain management software solutions, including transportation management, route planning, brokerage solutions, and also a global trade intelligence pillar. So in my pillar, we collect a tremendous amount of content. We are the largest content provider in the market, a trade content provider in the market. And we also, of course, use that content to call it fuel our own applications, compliance solutions like restricted party screening, classification solutions, and so forth.
And then could I ask you, what's the role of global trade intelligence within the greater Descartes family?
So Descartes itself is around 600 million in revenue. We're a public company. The global trade intelligence pillar represents about a quarter of that. The role we play is making sure that from a compliance perspective and a true trade compliance perspective, our clients have everything they can wish for. So if it comes to classification, needs verification of classifications, license determinations, restricted party screening, all those kind of solutions are represented in our pillar.
What's the interaction between that and supply chain intelligence?
So if you want to look at it holistically, supply chain intelligence, of course, covers a broader base, a broader ground than just the global trade intelligence. So we are part of that magnificent wheel, if you will. And so we collaborate with other solutions when it comes to exchanging data, exchanging information, or, for example, providing solutions, right? We do not need a classification solution for every particular pillar. We can provide that as a service to other solutions within Descartes. And so we leverage those back and forth. When another solution requires some trade content, they can get that from us. When we require a supplementary part for the last mile of a workflow, a purchase order workflow, and the filing part then gets taken care of by our brokerage capabilities. So there are some handoffs there, there's some integrations and so forth. So it collaborates together, but from a intelligence perspective, it's really about access to data and how the customer has as seamless as possible way from A to Z with the product and have the data follow in sync with that throughout the various applications that we support.
One of the reasons I was so excited to have the chance to visit with you is your length of time in this profession. And then I wanted to overlay some of the things I've seen maybe in the past 10 years. And I'm going to probably start with the Trump administration. And we saw a series of export control
Mhm.
initiatives, various regulations, rulings, people put on sanctions lists. that only largely accelerated during the Biden administration. Obviously, the Russian invasion of Ukraine was a key part of that part of this discussion. Of course, there was a pandemic, and if people had never heard of supply chain before pandemic, they certainly heard of supply chain after the pandemic and with global trade. So I really wanted to kind of introduce that maybe diverse series of topics, but how I see them coming together and sort of explore with you, how do you help a company in today an environment that's incredibly challenging from a regulatory perspective, it's incredibly challenging from a business perspective, and then it's incredibly and challenging from really the data capture and data analytics perspective. And I know I've thrown a lot in there, but could you really talk about how you've seen those parts, different parts, become a part of someone like yourself? It's just your routine business now.
Yes, so I think the way I approach it, at least, is you kind of looking at microservices at the one end, yet an holistic way of sharing relevant information at the other side. And so with microservices, it could be a restricted party screening solution by itself or a classification tool by itself. But at the same time, all those things function better when they have access to data that may be found at the very beginning or the very end of the information flow. To create that transparency is key to making those microservices function better, for one. And at the same time, you have to be very aware of data privacy, of security models, and making sure that we do not expose certain sensitive information to parties that have no business getting access to that information, or even by accident stumbling upon it, right? So all those things have to tie together when it comes to export compliance and resilience and supply chain intelligence and the solutions that you are going to offer in that respect. So if that's an AI-based solution, that's great, but you have to make sure that it doesn't overstretch what it's intended to do. So I think that's very important. So that's the way I kind of look at these things. There is usually an undercurrent, say, of an ongoing workflow, right? Purchase order or quote to delivery, if you want to call it that. But along that way, there's many services that can or should take place, right? You do have to do your screening, party and product. You want to make sure that when you are a shipper, you're not shipping something that you don't want to ship. So there's a screening component in that. You want to make sure that all the paperwork is filled out properly. And in all that, throughout the supply chain, you can likely find your answer. You can likely find your information that you need in order to classify. Now, what makes things a great solution is having that data available at the moment that you need it. And that time of how the information flows is what really can be enhanced by using the right type of technology. And a lot of times now we're talking about AI is the solution to everything. We've been automating for as long as I've been in this business, right? We've been automating for as long as we know. And I think we're getting into data quality issues in a bit as well. That's also been a problem for as long as we know. And no matter how great the technology, if you have terrible data, it's not going to help anything. But at the same time, you may find little things in the data that you're getting that's not that great that will allow you to go deeper into the supply chain or go to different vendors, different manufacturers, different partners to still pull that relevant information in at the time when you need it. And so a lot of the developments now are geared towards making that discrepancy in timeline less of an issue. And that helps compliance people quite a bit.
I really like the way you phrased it with from the microdata to the holistic approach, because I often see heads of supply chain who may have never been asked to make a presentation to a board of directors, all of a sudden after the pandemic, be called in front of the board of directors, and that they have to go into the weeds, as you said, literally down to a qualification or classification, yet maybe be asked for a much bigger picture for a different group. Is that a fair assessment?
It is. And I also think you can kind of look at the types of solutions that are out there right now, right? Some of them are, I would say, pitch perfect for a boardroom meeting. A lot of fancy colors and great stats and a lot of analytics behind it. That's part one, right? And those are things, if you look at supply chain disruption, for example, and maybe I'm jumping a little bit over the board here, but look at supply chain disruption. You try to prevent disruption. And you can do that by letting loose a number of analytics on your sourcing options, whether that's for a manufacturing location or for an actual vendor to purchase from. So you can limit your risks in that way. So that's part one of the equation. Then part two is now something happens. How do I prepare for what goes wrong, right? And how do I, whatever goes wrong, turn that into an actionable item? So whether that's a new piece of legislation that I need to work with, or if that's a flood or a volcano eruption. And back to the AI part of it, just like when you're preparing for disaster recovery, right? So as a software company, we of course have our, return to operations, our RTO and our disaster recovery plans in play. Now, we haven't had to activate them yet, never had to use them, but we can certainly do tabletop exercises, including a hot failover to make sure that our plans would actually work if something did occur. And supply chain disruption can be approached in a somewhat similar fashion, right? So you have your selection here of this is where we're going to manufacture, this is where we're going to source. Okay, now look at what may happen along the way, and the AI can simulate what happens, and you can start making plans for, okay, if this is a disruption, what action should I take? You can even let a simulated model loose and then say, okay, this is what we actually did during the pandemic. How could we have improved ourselves during that time? So there's more and more tools available to not necessarily replace anything other than to improve your processes and anticipate more and better as to what may come your way over the next periods.
That really leads directly into the next question, and I think you answered at least part of it, which is how can AI assist with potential supply chain disruptions?
Yes, I think as I mentioned, right, there is the anticipation part. And so the prevention part is by picking the right location and that will require a risk profile. If you do not necessarily need, say, electricity, or you're not afraid of flooding or waiting for your products a little longer, but you are very concerned about forced labor, that may push you in a certain direction. And you take your risk profile and you select your sources for, based on that. And then you have your additional, almost random factors that can also affect or disrupt your supply chain. And I think that's where AI comes into play. Like the first part is analytics, if you will. The second part is where AI can not even predict, right? Not really predict, but can help you with, okay, if there is a disruption, how do I model that? And as it stands, what would I do? Is there a better outcome to get to? And there's developments in AI where you can rewrite those scripts before it even happens, and your anticipation levels will increase, and you can find weaknesses in that supply chain and correct those and have scenarios ready as to how you should react when certain things occur. And again, if that's uh, a security breach with one of your partners, right? Or if it is indeed a month-long storming in the location where you have to where you normally route your products through. There's all these things that you can write scenarios for, and where AI can help you out with simulation and thereby enhancing your response times. Another part is, I think, very relevant in this context is how AI, or automation tools slash AI, can assist with, call it the time to user for new legislative initiatives. Right? Nowadays, certain type of content, say a restricted party list, they're adding on names to the list. With the various tools, you pick up the names, you add them to your database. You can screen those new names against your existing party master, where you keep all the parties you're doing business with. You can screen it within hours, or usually that happens overnight with a dynamic screening solution. And the next morning, you can alert the customer that, hey, these vendors are now on the list, and you probably want to take some actions because they are no longer legal to do business with. That's a very straightforward one because we have the list already. We're just adding names and it's all in the same format. But now there may be a brand new piece of legislation, right? The Russian sanctions are not party based, not HS based. They are initially product name based. So now how do I go from the product name to something that actually becomes an actionable thing where I know, oh, these products that I'm sourcing either directly in Russia or through a partner in Russia, or they're going to Russia through a partner, how do I alert my supply chain to that fact? With AI, you can monitor for the legislation. You can probably find tools that allow you to download that data quickly. There is, I guess we'll get into classification tools in a bit. There's ways to at least speed up or enhance that process to go from description to HS code. And once you then have it in the database, just like with the restricted party screening, you can run that against your product master at that point and say, okay, these products are now under additional scrutiny, or I want to review these products based on that legislative alert and see if they are indeed affected by this new piece of legislation. So if that's Russian sanctions, if that's carbon footprint legislation from Europe, if it is the consumer safety requirements that will come into play early next year, all these things, the time from legislation to an actionable item for the compliance person, those lead times are going to get reduced with the use of the right tools.
And what are some of the key issues companies face in tackling data quality issues? You mentioned that a little bit earlier, but
Yeah,
data quality issues which might hinder not only good business practices, but AI advancement as well.
yes, and I anticipated that question, of course. So there is no cure for getting a description that is other. There's no amount of tools that you can throw at that says, oh, other means 63, 10, 10, 9000. It doesn't matter. You have nothing to go by. Or clothing or electronics, right? But at the same time, as I mentioned before, somewhere in the supply chain, somebody does know what clothing or electronics actually refers to. So if you have a way to go back in that supply chain, or maybe there's a SKU mention on that invoice, just the description is terrible. If you have visibility, transparency throughout the supply chain, you might well be able to take that SKU number, go to the vendor, and pull up the relevant product data in order to actually classify the product at that point in time. Or they may already have an HS code associated with that SKU in one of their master files. So there is something there that we can do. At the same time, any given automated tool is only as good as the data allows it to be. And so when we're having terrible information, we cannot do much. But if you look at, for example, restricted party screening data, and you have a party name, but the city is listed in the address field, or the country is listed in the city field, right? So initially, if you put that in and you screen against it, your results may not be that great. But there's ways to actually clean up that data before you screen against it, right? There's, again, artificial intelligence capabilities that cleanse the data, if you or scrub it clean, and that would apply both to product and parties, where you can get rid of a certain terminologies or make sure that all the data is in the right field, or translate certain abbreviations always in the same way that the engine knows what it's looking for before it starts classifying. And there's ways to enhance the data before you start doing your compliance checks or your classification that would allow you at least to start with something more than a very terrible description. And when it comes to having bad data, of course, it is, if you put in bad data, you're going to get terrible results. And no amount of technology will ever resolve that. But we can certainly have a number of tools that allow the compliance people to make their jobs go smoother, if you will.
I'd like to move to maybe a two-part question. How would you assess our current stage of automation at nearly 2025? And then how do you see the continued evolution of AI into supply chain risk management down the road, maybe 5 years? So I will just sit back and listen.
Ooh, this guy, I can make this as long or as short as you want. Let me elaborate a little bit first. I think we're probably at around 1% or less of what AI will make possible. Right? We're barely starting here. At the same time, a lot of the things that we will be able to benefit from are somewhat laid out already, right? We will have a way where a fairly simple tool will be able to pull data from your TMS, your warehouse management system, your ERP, your CRM, your global trade system, your supply chain management system, and just make sure that the relevant data is available at the relevant time, whether that's for filing, for classification, or for compliance. So those things will evolve to where the user will have that information at their fingertips with a simple chatbot question that points to the relevant parts of the information sources. And that's also a couple of things to remember, right? If you go right now to a chatbot and you ask the question, what's the best band in the world, right? It's going to give you a list of probably 25 names, if not more. But if you have a database and it says, for example, the Beatles and the Wiggles, and now you ask the chatbot, what's the best band in the world? And you only point the chatbot to that particular database with those two names in it, it will more than likely pick up the right name as the answer, right? And it's not the Wiggles. And so when you're looking at the capabilities, it is also very much where you have it pointed to very precise databases where you know you can find the accurate answer. You may not know what it is at that point, but you can point the chatbot to that right answer. You're likely going to get the right answer back. And that doesn't mean there's no human needed anymore. They still have to verify these answers, right? But it can certainly assist them and take away a lot of the frustration of getting very lengthy answers where somewhere the answer is hidden. So that's really something to remember, is how powerful these tools can be and where this will be heading. At the same time, we're looking to create transparencies that will also evolve into a better analytics situation, right? The classification tools, for example, there's some seedlings there at this point in time. But from a classification perspective, if you look at what you need to classify, you need product characteristics, product description. You're probably going to use the WCO notes, explanatory notes, a tariff, cross-ruling databases, other ruling databases if you're going international. So there's a whole myriad of databases, of references that you're going to use in order to classify. And even then, you may not have all the information that you need available because there's the number of NTOPs is missing and you have to go back to your dev guy or your technical guy to get an answer for that. Well, an AI tool can approach all these references all at once and then can actually ask intelligent questions about it that guide you to come up with the right classification, because the AI tool will take the tariff as its lead, as a sort of a decision tree based lead, and start asking questions. Say, okay, how many MTOPs is it? You go left. If it's less than 500, you go right. And it almost on the spot builds a decision tree for you linguistically that you can then go through and end up with the right HS code. And so there's some tools now that are slowly getting there, but they're still, of course, depending on data quality on the input side. But when the data quality on the input side is eventually resolved by having a tool that has access to those references right off the bat across the applications, then you're really helping out the classification person. Creates an audit trail on the fly that you can also submit together with your classification, and off you go. And it's not to make it sound easy, right? We're at the very beginning of this, but the one other component of this is the generative AI, where it writes its own rules, or the machine learning component of it, where say that you're saying, okay, this pair of shoes, here's some characteristics, what are my HS code options? And it comes back with 3 or 5 of them. Now you select one, and that means the next time that the same description and the same characteristics come in, the one that you picked before is going to be top of the list. So it reduces your amount of work. Or you can instruct it to create a rule that, hey, the next time this comes in, just apply it, and I don't want to see it anymore. So there's a variety of ways how AI will evolve and streamline a lot of these compliance processes. And again, that's not to say it's going to replace people, because there's a necessity to keep us involved and to have the common sense check in there at a variety of times. And global trade becomes bigger, compliance regulations become stricter. right? If anything, as you mentioned, we've seen that there's more and more restrictions on global trade at this point in time. A lot of non-tariff barriers as well. So that means there's plenty of work to do to make sure that gets structured into your compliance processes. And using these tools, ideally, you don't overflow with workload. You're still able to manage this, even though the number of regulations you have to comply with grows.
Unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but before we leave, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted to perhaps connect with you or find out more information on Descartes, what might be the best place or places for them to go?
For Descartes, it's simple. It's just our website, Descartes, DESCARTES.com. And for me, always welcome. Happy to chat on LinkedIn. If you can figure out that my first name is indeed the Dutch version of a boy named Sue, and it's spelled A-N-E, then you probably can get to me pretty quickly. So I will look forward to any outreach that I can get here. Thank you.
And I wanted to thank you again for taking time to visit with me today, and I hope we can continue this conversation.